Alright guys, we're going to go ahead and go over the temporal bone. The temporal bones are located on the lateral side and inferior aspects of the skull. They're paired bones. The articulations that you should know are anteriorly and medially. It articulates with the sphenoid bone. So let me go ahead and outline the temporal bone really quickly for you. It has this process right over here which we're going to go over. And just follow my pen all the way through, and it comes down inferiorly as well. So if we look inside, this portion right over here is actually parietal bone, whereas around the same area where this begins, this little suture that you guys can see over here, down here it'll begin somewhere around over here, and then anteriorly and medially it will join up with the sphenoid bone. So something you should know. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about other articulations that you should know. Laterally it's going to articulate with the zygomatic bone right over here, and the zygomatic process of the temporal bone is what articulates with the zygomatic bone. Superiorly it'll articulate with the parietal bones, so again this is like the suture line for it articulating with the parietal bones, and posteriorly and medially it'll articulate with the occipital bone, so that's back over here. So you guys could all make that out. Now we're going to go ahead and go into the structures. So there's about, I would say, let me go and see this, about like 9 to 10 structures that you need to know about the temporal bone, but they're not too bad. It's pretty easy to tag and easy to see. So we're going to go ahead and go into the structures that you need to know. So right over here, this is the zygomatic bar. Again, it's made by the zygomatic process of the temporal bone and the temporal process of the zygomatic bone. So just when it comes down to tagging, just call this the zygomatic bar, what I'm outlining on my pen over here. So that's that. The mandibular fossa is located inferiorly, so we're going to go ahead and look underneath. This, hopefully you guys can see it, this is the mandibular fossa, and that's important for the temporal mandibular joint, so make sure you make a note of that. Right next to the mandibular fossa is going to be your articular tubercle, so make sure you call it articular tubercle of the temporal bone. So again, both of these regions play a role in the temporal mandibular joint, and that's good to know just for your lecture as well as your practical purposes. The next thing that we have to identify is the petrous portion of the bone, and the petrous portion is located right over here. And again, it's the densest bone in the body, and again, that's where your ear stuff is going on, and you should make a note of that from your lecture, what else you need to know. So this is the petrous portion of the temporal bone. Now we're going to go ahead and go into the internal acoustic meatus. The internal acoustic meatus, locate the petrous bone, and then right over here is your internal acoustic meatus. And out of the internal acoustic meatus is transmitting through the internal acoustic meatus the vestibulocochlear nerve. So make sure you make a note of that. The internal acoustic meatus, vestibulocochlear nerve. Now we're going to go ahead and try to find the jugular foramen. So the jugular foramen is right over here. And out of the jugular foramen comes what? 9, 10, and 11. So make sure you make a note of that. 9, 10, and 11, cranial nerves 9 through 11 is coming out of the jugular foramen. There's a way to remember that. It's 9, 11. So it goes 8 right over here, 9, 10, 11. And then we know 12 is the hypoglossal canal, which we'll get to later. So it goes pretty much in order, and it's pretty nice, and we'll be able to make it out, hopefully, with another video. That's the superior view of the skull. So now we're going to go ahead and go into the foramen lacerum. And the foramen lacerum is located right over here. So that's the foramen lacerum, and that is also another foramen lacerum. And there is nothing really important or structurally that we have to know yet about the foramen lacerum. Maybe on another video I'll be able to tell you about it. But for the temporal bone, just know this is the foramen lacerum right over here. And don't get it confused with the carotid canal, okay? Do not get it confused with the carotid canal. So, that said, now we're going to go ahead and turn it around again and look at the petrotympanic fissure. So, petrotympanic fissure is right over here. And that petrotympanic fissure is important for transmitting the chorda tympani and the anterior branch of the maxillary artery. So make sure you know, for practical purposes, they might tag right over here what structures are going in between this structure. And first and foremost, you have to know it's the petrotympanic fissure, and then you have to know that it transmits the chorda tympani, which again is from what nerve? Cranial nerve 7, and the anterior tympanic branch of the maxillary artery. Now we're going to go ahead and talk about the mastoid process. The mastoid process is pretty easy to find. It's right over here. So the mastoid process, again, is designed to hold the air cells that's important for hearing and other things. The mastoid foramen is for the emissary vein. And the mastoid foramen, let me see if I can find it on the other side. Hopefully you guys can make it out. Just one second. It's like this thing right over here. It's a little hole, but you can't really make it out too well on the skull. Usually it's a very definitive hole that you guys can see right behind your mastoid process. Thought I saw it earlier when I was doing a rough view of this video, but I can't see it anymore. Another important portion is the styloid process. The styloid process is not evident on this. It got ripped or it got torn apart with just handling the skull, so there would be one here as well as one here. And the styloid process is origin for several muscles and ligaments. Pop quiz: what innervates the stylopharyngeus muscle? And that would be guess. It's the glossopharyngeal nerve, and that's also the landmark for the stylopharyngeus muscle, as well as when you're doing a posterior view of the neck, you could hopefully be able to make out the glossopharyngeal nerve running right along it. So that was just that's one muscle that attaches to a styloid process, and it's a good way to keep your mind active, and hopefully I'm doing that for you right now. Lastly, there's one more foramen that you need to know. It's the stylomastoid foramen, which is right over here. This one's pretty clearly seen. So that would be the mastoid process here, the styloid process right there. The foramen that's in between them is the stylomastoid foramen. The stylomastoid foramen transmits what? The facial nerve as well as the stylomastoid artery. So make sure you note that the stylomastoid foramen transmits the facial nerve as well as the stylomastoid artery. Now, there's a couple other things that we need to know. One of them is the external acoustic meatus, which is right over here. Pretty easy tag. Hopefully you guys will be able to get it on test day. And lastly, we have the sigmoid sulcus. Sulcus for the sigmoid sinus. So call it the sulcus for the sigmoid sinus, which is right around here. I'm just outlining right over here. Sulcus for the sigmoid sinus. So that's pretty much it for the temporal bone. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's a little dense, a little longer than our usual videos, but hopefully it all helps you get through.